All right, I'm here with President Mike Gibson, our new district president. President Mike, thank you so much for spending the time to do this little interview. Asking you today about policy-based governance and when might it be the right move for a congregation to make that shift, especially as a congregation desiring to really become a missional church. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. As I've just finished talking and teaching here today, one of my primary areas of focus and commitment is it's got to happen in a highly relational environment. You can't really do policy governance without trust being in place. Right. Often what happens is that a congregation that feels like it's struggling wants to put more control in place, and they think that changing polity is going to help bring better function to their organization. That's not the case. Really, an organization that's working, you don't necessarily need to fix its polity. Polity is really only the hanger that's inside the clothing, that you hang on the rack. So it's whatever it takes for your organization to function, then you create the polity that way. Now, once you're at a higher level of organization, policy-based governance is really important, but it does anticipate a very high level of trust between the executive or the pastor and the congregational leadership. And it also expects and demands the highest possible communication, because without it, trust gets lost if people are not being highly transparent. So if those pieces are in play, high relationship, high communication, and high trust, then you're going to be able to implement something like that, okay? And then policy governance, it's the idea of, I describe it as like a horse corral. You tell your team what they can't do, but you don't tell them what they can do, so you put limits on them. And then part of that communication is that when you overstep your limitations, you're supposed to self-report. Well, that requires that level of communication and trust. So you have those pieces in play, high relationship, high communication, and high trust. You can step into policy governance at a very, very effective way.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your thoughts with us.
You bet. Glad to. God bless you.
All right. We are here at the Pacific Southwest District Pastors Conference, and I'm here with Pastor Nate Schaus from Summit Community Church in Buckeye, Arizona. How are you doing, Nate?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you so much. Hey, Grace Escondido, leaders. Great to be with you today.
So appreciate you spending time with me this morning, and we're here to talk about policy-based governance and how that impacts a church's effectiveness in mission. So how might as we talk about governance, that's probably not on a lot of people's radars, but it actually makes a pretty significant impact on carrying out the mission. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, policy-based governance has certainly been a blessing to our church. We made that transition here just in the last 2 to 3 years, something like that. We were a church plant, so we had launched, and I had gotten to Summit when there were about 50 people, and so we've grown over time, and so our models of leadership have adapted over time. Oftentimes, I think in new seasons of leadership, in times along the way there, that whatever God's calling you to do, that oftentimes means a shift. And so we started early on. We really followed some of those stages of development. We had the working board early on, where we had kind of one group where it was almost representative. Everybody on that leadership team, when I first got there, somebody was responsible for things with kids and with our groups, or with adult education and all that. And then we shifted over time there to where we had 2 groups, where we had our management team and our spiritual leadership team. And those were set up there, where our spiritual leadership team was more of what you might call a board of elders, kind of wise spiritual leaders. And then on the management team, we had more of our business leaders and people there. And that was where our formal officers for the congregation sat. And over time, as we've done a lot of research, and we really prayed through how do we set up leadership, especially for growth going into the future, that there's no reason why you can't bring that spiritual leadership and that management together into one board and into one ministry team. And policy-based governance really makes the case there that the senior leader, your senior pastor, is accountable to the board, but the board isn't involved in operational details. That's the big change with policy-based governance. Your board is no longer asking about specific individual programs or what happened last weekend. It moves the board to where it's more future thinking, it's more mission oriented, and it really helps to hold those big picture, where are we going, where is God taking us, and then sets up annual goals with that senior leader. And that leader then is the one who's responsible for the entire staff team and leading the day-to-day ministry. And I have found, as a senior pastor, really interesting. It's been fascinating with policy-based governance that I am simultaneously now, I have more freedom to make decisions and really to lean into opportunities ministry-wise. I have more freedom than I've ever had before, and I have more accountability than I've ever had before. I think sometimes you have more systems and more things and more stuff, and sometimes you think that the more teams or the more committees you have, the more accountability there is. If it's really fuzzy or there's no clear lines of authority, I find now this is very clear, very simple, and I'm very accountable to it, but also have a lot of freedom at the same time.
Well, that's very helpful, because I think a lot of people might be concerned about, in making that shift, is there going to be oversight of the carrying out of ministry of the pastor? But you're saying there's a strong element of accountability, yet at the same time you feel very empowered to be the missional leader of the church.
No, that's very, very true. There certainly is accountability. In fact, I think there's even clearer accountability than there has been there before. But the difference is that it does change. It's like individual staff members then are no longer accountable to the board. It's one of those things, like we ask a set of questions at the end of our board meetings, and we're certainly happy if you guys go down that road and want to take a look at our policy book. We had framed that up and had worked with some other churches and other people there to help say, man, what's worked well for you? Certainly willing to share that, but that's one of those things where you talk about, are we staying focused on policy and on those big picture strategic mission issues as a board, or did we fall into operational things? And that'll be a change. It was for our people, where all of a sudden sometimes even some of our board members initially when we started said, well, so what's our job? They were so used to doing other things, they had to be willing to let go and allow the staff to take a higher level of responsibility and accountability, often to the senior pastor, as opposed to the board kind of working directly with a lot of individual people. Or I don't know what your structure is, but if you've got a lot of individual committees or groups, sometimes you're used to operating very differently. So it's not only a change for the senior pastor, it's certainly a big change for the board.
Yeah. And we have an administrative council and a board of elders. So we are probably where you were before you made that shift to policy-based governance. Last question is, what do you think might be some people's hesitations making that shift, and how might you speak to that?
Well, some of the hesitations there that I've just referenced were certainly, it's a change, and sometimes when people are used to, you can't just put a new model in place and say we have policy-based governance and then kind of default back to all the same ways you used to do things. That will be an absolute mess. So it's for the sake of your senior pastor, for the sake of your board, for the sake of your staff, you want to take some time. I think it's wise to get somebody that can help to facilitate policy-based governance, or at least training and installing that from the outside, so that when you have somebody that comes in and does that helps you then have for a board retreat, or for it's something with the senior pastor. There's something there that will allow that new team or some of the players that are involved right now to say, that's what that looks like, and here's how that goes. So I think that's a question. I think whenever you shift leadership for a church as a whole, we certainly rolled out in advance before our annual voters meeting. We rolled out some of those things. We gave people the chance to ask questions. I find, though, that tends to be a shift that is more significant for the board and the people that are actually involved. Like for your administrative council and your board of elders, it probably will be a bigger deal for more of those people than it is for the individual member in the church. And having people speak positively, if you're going to change that way, to dig into it and then be able to speak positively about it from your different leadership teams and from the from the staff side and from the senior pastor side to say, hey, here's why we're excited about doing this. And I think that will help some of the individual members that might have a little bit of hesitation. Wow, it seems like the pastor's making a lot more decisions than he used to before. Are you guys okay with that? To be able to quickly respond and say, oh, that's true. Our staff has a lot of authority here, but here's where that accountability is in place, can be very helpful.
Great. Well, thank you. Very helpful. Would you mind just how long have you been pastor at Summit?
So I've been pastor at Summit 600. So we came out there 11 years ago, and so we've been on the ground. It had been planted a couple of years earlier, and then that planter left, and so there was a group of about 50 people that were trying to figure out, do we continue on in ministry? Was this just not meant to be? And so I have been there for the last 11 years. It was my third call. I was in Las Vegas for a few years before that. My first call was in Kansas when I started out. When I started out there, some of you that have been involved in leadership a very long time at Grace Escondido might remember that when I was at the seminary, I interviewed with you guys as well. So
I didn't know that.
Yes, and the seminary and the Lord in His wisdom decided that I needed to be at someplace else there along the way. But yes, we are. I've been there for 11 years. Started very, very small, and now have grown to where now we're worshiping in a high school with about 650 on a weekend, and we're getting ready to build our first facility. So I'm very happy in my ministry at Summit. There's really some big opportunities in front of us for what we're doing next, but it's been it's been a journey where we've had to adapt and change our leadership. And my leadership has had to grow along the way.
Yeah.
There too.
All right. Well, Pastor Nate, thank you so much for your missional leadership, for what you bring to the church, to the kingdom of God, and for taking the time to spend with us this morning.
Sounds good. Thanks. God bless.
All right, I'm here with Pastor Tom Meyer. Tom Meyer, who is actually our circuit visitor and who has been walking through this transition and call process with us. We're here at the Pastors Conference. Pastor Tom, how are you doing?
Good.
So we are here, and we're going to talk about, of all things, policy-based governance. And Pastor Tom wanted to hear your thoughts on that as Grace is going through a transition, and as many churches are seeing a need for a transition to really become a missional church. What does governance have to do with empowering missional leadership in the church?
Well, I think somewhat more than maybe empowering. The opposite is kind of thwarting. I think some of the old traditional ways in which we structured and did governance had a negative impact on what we were trying to do in missional area. I think governance frees up churches to be more responsive to community needs, to the community itself, and the congregation itself too, and it allows it to be responsive. And I think the whole policy-based system allows for larger congregations. I'm not sure how it works in smaller congregations, but in larger churches, it really allows it to be more reactive quickly to situations. Where before in the old system where you had all boards, you'd have to get approval from a board, and then they'd have to go to a church council, and several months would go by before you'd finally able to implement whatever it was that needed to be do to be responsive. And I think it just allows you to do that and to be, to carry out, and if you feel called to some kind of ministry or some kind of community involvement or whatever, it allowed you to react and to do it.
What hesitations do you think a church might have in shifting to policy-based governance, and how might you speak to those hesitations?
I think there's two things. One is, I think, the gifts of the pastor, the senior pastor, if it's multi-staff. And I was asked one time, I kind of gave the presentation to a congregation, and the senior pastor asked me, what gifts should I have to do this? And I had to think about that for a minute, and I kind of thought, well, you need to be administrative, you need to have leadership gifts, and I think you have to be willing to take some risks in the whole process. And I think congregations that pastors senior pastors especially, if it's multi-staff, need to have that kind of gift going on. If they're what a lot of pastors are, they're the caring, compassionate kind of guys who like to teach and like to visit shut-ins and all that. I'm not sure that lends itself well to doing this. I think there needs to be more of an initiative kind of leader, initiating kind of thing, guy who's willing to take some risk. One of the things that I discovered, and reading some more on what Carver says, he talks about it too, is finances. Sometimes before a board of directors becomes aware that there's a financial difficulty, it's pretty far down the road. Last congregation I served, we addressed that by having what we called a cash crisis committee. And it was anytime the treasurer got into a situation where he was unable to pay the bills on time, the cash crisis committee was called into existence. And sometimes it meant that they asked staff to hold off cashing their paychecks until after another Sunday offering could be deposited. Sometimes it was asking vendors if they could wait 30 days or if we could make a half payment now and half payment later. And if you would have to rely on a board of directors to make those decisions, and Carver talks about that, you'd be too far down the road and in bigger trouble. You need to respond quickly to those financial things. And I guess those are two of the cautions that I think are prevalent in that.
Right. Well, Pastor Tom, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Appreciate your time. Pacific Southwest District Pastors Conference, and I am here with Gary Norton. Gary Norton is director of the Revitalization Ministries for our district. Gary, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
All right. It's great to be here with you, and we are talking about policy-based governance. And Gary, we would like to hear your thoughts. How does policy-based governance empower missional leadership, and then what might be some precautions for churches exploring that opportunity?
Policy-based governance works best when the pastor is a strong missional leader. Traditional styles of congregational organization and governance do not encourage that strong missional leadership like a policy-based governance does. But on the other hand, if we're dealing with a leader, you have to be sure that that person really is a leader, not just leader talk, but leader history as well. The second concern that I have is in regard to how congregations adapt to that kind of a difference. Therefore, this process needs to be done slowly, helping the whole congregation come along. Because there are many probably well-experienced leaders in the congregation who feel like somebody's taking away their leadership.
Right.
And that's not what we want to have done. We want to find ways for them to become involved. The third thing is that in what are called boundary principles, there are other words for it, but that's my terminology. Boundary principles require a strong definition of what is the limitation, and that you don't go outside that box. So that's what I've experienced in working with congregations, especially as they do the work toward this kind of a missional leadership.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Gary. That was very helpful for us, and I appreciate your time today. All right. Well, I am here with Pastor Jake Bessling, and we're here in Palm Springs at the Pacific Southwest District Pastors Conference. Pastor Jake, how are you doing? It is. I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you, and to tell you a little bit of my story with Pastor Jake. So, Pastor Jake went through the CMC, the Cross Cultural Ministry Center, with me, with the program that I'm in, and he's been a huge mentor for me. Also, a really big inspiration. But one time, Pastor Jake and Pastor Tim Allman at Christ Greenfield Lutheran Church, they hosted me for 3 days and just to encourage me and pour into me. And one of the things that they brought up during this time, which was something that for me as a victor was not really on my radar at all, was church governance. So they kind of explained to me some of the implications for mission that your given model of governance might have. So Pastor Jake, how might you speak to that? How does a model of governance impact the church's effectiveness in carrying out the mission?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm no expert in any of this, and there's people on this video that are better at this. I love that we have consultants in our synod that can come in to help as an outside source and resource that know a ton about this, have read up on it, have led the change to help a church that's kind of dysfunctional in their governance go to a healthy, functional governance. Because a lot of this takes time. It takes bylaws and constitutions being rewritten, and there's a lot of different form of governance that can help. But I lived through an old school model where I was a DCE that was reporting to a lay person, lay volunteer, who then was reporting on the board or the council, they would say, and voting about things that were affecting the whole church. But they just wanted to do youth ministry. They just wanted to help the DCE out, and yet they were then deciding if they were going to fire someone. And so at the time when we were growing as a staff, we needed a different form of governance so that the vision and mission of the pastors, vicars, staff members, DCEs would all function well, because the staff have their vision, the council had their vision, and it was really just in friction. And if the staff liked where it was headed, it was good. If the staff didn't, they were there all the time, and these volunteers would just kind of check in once a month for these meetings. And so you can see where the conflict would come, where the staff is doing it every day, but it's going to take 2 to 3 months to get something approved. Mm-hmm. There are forms of governance that will lend itself better if you're a church under 100, but if you get maybe 250, 300 to 500, there's probably a different form of governance, and especially 500 or more, you need things to move a lot faster. So we are policy-based governance, moving to policy governance of a church of about 1,000 right now, and Tim Allman can speak more to the differences between policy-based governance and policy governance. But as a staff member, let's just say policy-based governance with staff-led model. If you have, 5, 6, 7, 8 staff members that want to move the mission of Jesus forward, have a clear vision, and then they have to go get all that approved every single month by a lot of different people. It takes a lot of energy and passion out of the staff. So if you're a church that's looking to move forward, and you have enough staff members that are ready to go, a policy-based governance, staff-led model is definitely a way to go. Another thing is that to get the right pastor in place that has worked with policy-based governance or policy governance, staff-led model, to have them come to your church, it's really difficult to get them there when they're going to be stifled by this tough, rigid system with a lot of lay people leading things, when yes, they're invested and that's amazing, but they're not the full-time staff member. So that can be a problem.
So you would say that it's a totally different experience for the pastor.
Yes.
Because under the one model, the pastor needs to continually seek permission.
Yes.
Whereas under policy-based governance, the pastor is empowered to carry out the mission.
Exactly. I like your words there. And also in policy-based governance, there's accountability,
right.
Real high accountability. And the pastor wants that. Like, I, as a pastor, want accountability. I want clear lines of accountability. I want to know who I report to, versus it being, is it the elders? Is it the council? Who do other people report to? And so policy-based governance, don't hear it, if you're a layperson, as it's just this free-for-all, or the pastor has so much power. Yes, they have a lot of authority, but they're still reporting to the board of directors that are going to keep him, not in line, but they can do whatever they need to keep him accountable. And a lot of times, yes, in a smaller church, a lot of people that sit on the council have to be in the weeds of things and doing a lot of different tasks. But if you're really honest with yourself, maybe you also want to just be doing evangelism, not be the head of evangelism, versus letting the staff member who's passionate about it equip you and lead you, and you don't have to be dealing with all the budgets and a lot more things that are going on, versus just using your gifts into the community. So I see with policy-based governance, staff-led model, a lot of people are able to use their gifts in the right way. They're not all meant to be on the boards and the councils and all of that, or the heads of the different groups. But let the staff equip them and let the staff report to the senior pastor. They're there all week. They can get the job done. They can have a mission and vision, and the whole congregation's going to hear about it. The council's going to hear about it, and it's going to be very clear.
All right, and just last thing, do you want to kind of give us a snapshot of just the revitalization that has taken place at Christ Greenfield, and then maybe just speak a little bit to the part that governance played in that?
I would say we were coached that to get the right senior pastor, you're going to have policy-based governance at least on track, and I agree with that, or a staff-led model kind of deal. You can always have hybrids of policy-based governance or policy governance. You can always have hybrids of policy governance and policy-based governance, staff-led model. There's a lot of different ways out there. The part of the revitalization was to have a consultant and have some of that moving forward before that senior pastor would take that position. And that was happening for us when Tim came aboard. And that helped us revitalize faster. That helped us give him the authority needed to lead the staff in a mission and vision that could be then back to the congregation to approve. For us, it's join the journey, a 3E journey, experience the love of Jesus, be empowered by his word to expand the kingdom, and a lot of freedom then to move forward with generosity effort to speak to the congregation about that. Simple decisions like, what are we going to preach? Let the staff member who's the senior pastor decide that, because they care for the congregation, and allow, yes, other people to speak into it, but allow the person that you have called to lead there. So that's what happened for us, allowing the senior pastor to work with his team to decide those things. And so as the senior pastor works with his team, we do that now. What are we going to preach on? What are we going to focus on? How are we going to spiritually care for these people? And allowing the board to then function on up and out 2 to 10 year vision versus the staff carrying out the 2 year vision. And that's what we're doing at Christ Greenfield.
All right. Pastor Jake, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. Appreciate the thoughts that you shared.
Good job, David. Love it.
Thanks for your missional leadership. All right, so I'm now with Pastor Tim Allman. Pastor Tim, thank you for being with me, and we're going to chat for a little bit about policy-based governance. But do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no, Tim Allman. I am pastor at Christ Greenfield Lutheran Church and School in Gilbert, Arizona, and I've been there 5 years, having lots of fun. Jesus is moving in mighty ways. Love your vicar and David. He's doing wonderful things. Got to teach him at the cross-cultural ministry program this last summer, and so a little bit of the story came in. Simple way to understand it: we were financially anxious, we were internally focused, and we were divided, church and school. Some new things needed to start. One of the main memories of mine when I first got there 3 months in, our head elder looked at me and in turn our team and said, "Do something." And I was like, I don't exactly know what to do, but we did have enough, I guess, authority and expectation for me in a senior pastor role to actually lead, to dream new dreams of their team, to find common shared language, to then put together a plan to engage the community, to have the ability to start something new. Many of you heard we started with Pastor Jake Bessling, La Mesa, and that's gone very well. That was really the heart of who we are. We want to be about caring for the community. But then you have some questions about some governance. So that's it. I do two things. I think any good leader in a church, pastoral leader, needs to do two things, and it's cast clear and compelling vision to reach the lost. How are we going to do that? Our main mission is to make disciples who make disciples. Multiplication is huge for us. So how do I empower the saints for love and good deeds? Our 3 E's are: we experience the love of Jesus, we're empowered by the Holy Spirit to see the kingdom of God expand. And so we are on a missional movement to reach the lost. And then on that movement, this is my second job. So one, cast vision. Second one is, how well are we loving one another? How well are we identifying our pain points, our conflicted areas, and then caring for one another, and it's been great, and really always feel like the best is yet to come. Right, we're never done. Not until Jesus comes back are we done. And so looking forward to casting new dreams with our team and seeing where Jesus leads us.
All right, so the next thing I want to ask you is what role did governance play in this, and how can governance either empower missional leadership in the church or maybe even hinder it?
That's a really good question, David. Well articulated. So governance is a big deal. We just heard in our talk with our district president that vision is in the front seat. You got relationships in the passenger seat. There's 4 different seats, and then you've got kind of programs in the back seat, and then kind of the structure that undergirds it sometimes gets too highly elevated to say that it's kind of the silver bullet. Couldn't agree with him more about that. It's not the silver bullet. I mean, Jesus and a heart and a culture. We really got to talk culture first. How well are we loving one another? That has to be foundational. But out of that, I mean, what is the structure for Grace that could accommodate the missional movement of Jesus? So yeah, policy governance is huge. A lot of times governing boards, whether you call it a parish planning council or elders, or in our case a board of directors, they have this tendency to say, I want to manage and I want to hold folks accountable. And that can get kind of messy. So what policy governance does, and we're using actually we're in the process of using the strict John Carver's model of policy governance. The board only speaks with one voice, and the board speaks through policy. So they develop with me and in turn our staff what our ends are, what our long-range objectives are, and then they set policy to say, and senior pastor, do not step outside of these boundaries. They're called senior pastor limitations. But everything else within this area, it's pre-approved. You lead here, and we expect you to reach the ends, accomplish the mission, while staying within the boundaries, the limitations. And so it leads to quicker decisions, but they better be well-informed decisions, and there has to be an incredible amount of transparency. So there's great accountability. I have to give our board an extraordinary amount of metrics. It's not just my opinion. This is actually what the congregation is saying, where the community is in need of Jesus. We have to have some metrics that back up where we're going. But then we get to move. Once I'm able to give a reasonable interpretation of how I'm staying within those boundaries while I'm achieving the ends, then everything else it's game on. And frankly, if you're in any sort of business environment, you have to, this is just a first article reality. God is creator, how organizations work and thrive. You have to have that trust of your leadership. And if pastors could, move to, there's 2 different extremes, which should certainly be avoided with a pastor. It's control. I just kind of like telling people what to do. You do this. No. That's to be rejected. But then on the other hand, it's laziness, right? And I just kind of show up on Sundays and I just kind of do my thing and word and sacrament. And you guys, you people there, the congregation, you just figure it out. Well, that's acquiesce in your leadership responsibility. It's no good there either. So there is a middle way, and I think policy governance provides that. It really moves a board from management, this is the finish, moves a board from management to governing, and then entrusting the leadership team, the staff, under the supervision of the pastor, to cast great vision and actually move from just talk to execution. We actually want to see some missional movement taking place. And we trust you with that, and we expect it of you. So that's what policy governance can do with a board.
Yeah, I've heard you put it as it's a high trust, high accountability relationship. Last thing to ask you is, touching on trust. Do you want to just explain the importance of trust in a church, and then how policy-based governance might lend to creating that culture of trust?
So you kind of have 2 things there. There are 2 different models going around right now. What I've been living in is policy-based governance, which is very organic, adaptive. If you have, and I think you do, multiple kind of committees, which are in turn kind of silos, then I think a hybrid model for a season may be good before you'd maybe get to the strict policy governance model that I was talking about. But how is it, to your question, how is trust created? It's, every pastor knows who are our opinion leaders. And am I creating feedback loops with them? Do I care about them? Do I want to know about them? Am I getting kind of big data from surveys? And then am I sitting down with the folks that are leaders in our congregation, the lay leaders, and a lot of you non-paid staff, you're doing a lot of incredible things, but am I listening to you? And then is the vision, the dream, am I adapting to what I hear you saying? And it's not just me kind of coming in with a dream, and then how do I get people to come along with my dream? No, the leader has to continually say, you need to speak into this. And we're going to come to a place of collaboration, not just compromise, we're lose-lose, right? But there's collaboration and there's momentum out of that. We all agree this is where we ought to go. So that's a never-ending work, is establishing and then continuing to develop trust as a leader. You can't just set it and forget it and then lead out of, there's going to be no more opportunity for you to speak into this. No, it's always adaptive, right? The same spirit that lives in me lives in each member of the body of Christ. And so, yeah, it's consistent feedback loops to your leaders that helps to establish and maintain trust.
All right. Well, Pastor Tim, we appreciate it so much. Thank you for spending the time and sharing your thoughts with us.
You're a stud, dude.
And thank you for your missional leadership.
Yeah, dude, you're a stud. God bless you.